Okay, so if we continue on with walking through this presentation, one of the things that Jensen does in that chapter one, which again, that link is provided, is that he talks about the types of poverty that you may encounter. And so situational poverty is maybe what a lot of us are going through right now with the COVID virus. Is situational is not that you were born, raised, and continue to live in poverty, but you're living in poverty because of a certain situation at the moment. So maybe there was a crisis or an illness or something else that happened that caused you to live in poverty. Generational poverty is kind of what I referred to at the right at the first, that you've got generations who are living in poverty. So your mom lived in poverty, now you live in poverty, your kids are living in poverty. That's generational poverty. Absolute poverty means that not only is your income level at that poverty level, but that you also lack maybe some of the basic needs like food, water, and shelter. Relative poverty means that maybe you're not technically living in poverty based on the federal guidelines, but because of the area that you live in, the cost of living is so high that you're living in relative poverty. So, for example, maybe in New York City, you're making more than that 25,000 for your family of four, but you can't support yourself because of the cost of living there. And then you have, based on location, types of poverty. Now, Ruby Payne is another author and researcher when it comes to poverty. So you're reading Jensen's book, but Ruby Payne also does a lot of work with kids in poverty. And so one of the things that she talks about is, asking the question, is poverty a culture? And one of my old mentors and I had this debate all the time on, is poverty a culture? Well, what is culture? Culture are shared like values, norms, and beliefs. And so can we say that if you come from a family of poverty, do you share similar norms, cultures, and beliefs as other people living in poverty? And so I've asked myself this question because I didn't have a lot of money growing up, and neither did my husband. And one of the things that I think we share is the idea that, we use our resources wisely. I mean, we still wash out Ziploc baggies, because we don't want to be wasteful. That we try to make sure that, we're really mindful of the things that we use. And so this comes from Ruby Payne. This is one of the things that she talks about. So she puts it in terms, instead of like the EACH of Jensen, she puts it in terms of how families are maybe resourced or under-resourced in some of these areas. So she talks about maybe that kids who are coming from poverty might have financial under-resourcing. Like, for example, maybe they don't have enough resources to buy new shoes every year or clothes or school supplies. Maybe they have not the type of an under-resourcement of relationships, maybe of role models. And so she talks about it in terms of this. And so I like thinking about it in that way, thinking about that maybe our kids are lacking some of the resources that they need so that they can be successful in school. And so then how can we, as educators, make sure that they are resourced so that they have that readiness to learn? And so going back to that idea of culture, this is also pulled from her book. This is kind of how she's making her point. She's saying, like, if you're upper class, then you probably know how to do these things. And so you could ask yourself, can I do these things? If you answer yes to a majority of question, maybe you're in that upper class culture. And then this is what she talks about as kind of in terms of middle class culture and then poverty culture. And so I think she's trying to make the point that if you're living in some of these certain socioeconomic status, there's a certain, again, norms and beliefs and behaviors that are common to the people living in those communities. One of the best things that I saw at a conference recently is this idea of we need to also relate Maslow's model to the idea of kids living in poverty, because Maslow's hierarchy of needs talks about at the very base level, you need like food, water, shelter. You need safety. You need to feel loved and belonged. You need to work on your self-esteem, kind of things. And that if these things aren't taken care of, cognitive needs is piled on top of all of this. So the argument was made at this conference that if you kind of poke holes in all of this, then these things have no place to kind of stand on, if that makes sense, if there's no foundation there. So if kids don't have their basic needs met, they don't feel safe, they don't feel loved, they don't feel like they belong, then how are you going to be able to fill their heads with things that they need to know to be